Welcome to episode 4 of the MDF Midseason Team Reviews. We are looking at the TheFFPrez, our 2021 champion, 2022 third place finisher, and unfortunately this year, 4-10 record at the halfway point. Uh, all league record Im- kind of implies that we should expect a 4.5 to 9.5 record, so we're right in that range, 4 to 5 wins. Um, Points for 595. One of the lower marks, third lowest in the league. Where this gets interesting is the max points for, which is 937. Um, Actually, the sixth best mark in the league. So we've got 12th mark for points for, but sixth in max points for. Um, this gives us an efficiency or realized points for the picking starters at just 64%. By far the worst mark. I believe second worst is 73%. So this has a lot to do with why a team that's traditionally been very successful is not having success this year. Um, Also not helping is the points against, 788, which is the third most points against. So with the inefficiency we've seen out of the starters or the choices for starting, and then the high points against, that's just a recipe, unfortunately, for disaster when it comes to the record. Um, it's worth noting that the max points for does take into account the taxi squad. And that's going to be a big contributor for why the efficiency is so low on this squad. It's not the only explanation, but it is part of it. Currently stashed away on taxi, you got Sam Laporta, Zay Flowers, and Josh Downs. Laporta and Flowers especially have had some really big weeks. Laporta's been actually pretty consistently good. Flowers getting large numbers of targets, quite productive most weeks. Josh Downs recently has taken off with Gardner Minshew taking over at quarterback out there in Indy. So all those points are going towards that max points for. And given the off-season poach and the value of stashing some players away on taxi if you're not competitive, those are points that honestly can't be started. So that is having a bit of an impact, but it's not the only explanation. Honestly, even if those guys were available, were getting into the starting lineup, we'd probably be seeing an efficiency in the lower third of the league. Um, Kind of accounted for in the points against, there being third highest against. The opponent combined record has been the hardest schedule in the league, tied with, I believe, one or two other squads. So it's not been an easy schedule thus far. The remaining schedule does soften up quite a bit. It's the 10th hardest, fifth easiest for the remainder of the season. So with a squad that does have that potential to score a lot of points, should we get the right people in the starting lineups on a week-to-week basis, and a bit of a softer schedule, I wouldn't be surprised if we hit week 14 and this squad is looking at potentially finishing close to 500. Because of that high max points for, it is a squad that's not going to be picking high in the draft. That being said, they don't have their first round pick anyway, so it's really just impacting that second round pick and the first that someone else holds. So probably that second's picking 209, 210. Oh, sorry, those would be the plus ones. 208, 207. Um, so I mean, it's a piece that will have some value. There's always interesting players mid second, but I don't think we can expect any obvious impact players coming out of any of these picks. Top dynasty assets, we got Sam Laporta, Zay Flowers, DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Josh Downs. So three of those five are the previously mentioned taxi squad players. So this is definitely a squad that has a lot of talent. The record isn't reflective of the talent the squad has, and based on history, based on the roster we're looking at, based on the talent available, this is probably a squad that is going to be competitive next year. Kind of reminds me of some of those, like Golden State Warriors, Steph and Curry both get hurt, and they end up picking near the top of the NBA draft for 1 year just to be back and competing for a championship again the next year after winning championships years leading up to it. So like it's one of those things where things happen. Sometimes a good team just doesn't it doesn't happen. It doesn't work out. Probably our biggest underachiever, or at least close to it. There's probably one other squad I would say is underachieved to a greater extent, but going into the season, a team that was thought to be competitive for that sixth playoff spot. Not one of the not one of the absolute top tier 90% plus playoff expectations, but definitely someone we thought would be competing for that sixth spot, competing for the playoffs, and that seems unlikely at this point. It's not out of the question. I mean, crazier things have happened. A 12-2 stretch coming up here could get there. 16 wins often does make the playoffs. And with the softening schedule, the potential points that this team can score, there is a possibility, but it's going to be tough. Big part of that is when we look over here at the Warp. No one on this squad is performing to the level where they're a every week plug them in, they're gonna do it for you. At least not the expectation. I mean, Josh Dobbs is leading this team in Warp. Again, I've mentioned in previous episodes, Warp does tend to skew towards quarterbacks. So, I mean, quarterbacks tend to see higher numbers than the other positions, particularly higher than tight end. And that can kind of tell us a little bit about why Sam Laporta is being held down a little bit as well. But you've got five guys all really in a decent spot. With Dobbs, DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Mac Jones, Sam Laporta, all .4 to .868. And then like this is where the max points for is going to be high, but it also is where it's difficult to capitalize on that. The team is deep. Um, a lot of guys that perform above replacement level. I believe there's 12 or 13 guys with a positive warp on this team. The top 10 are shown on the screen here. We don't really have access due to Taxi Squad to Downs, Flowers, and Laporta in the 5, 7, and 10 spots. But you've got a lot of guys who are good, but maybe haven't been consistent, and that's kind of where it's tough. Um, I think this is a squad that sets up really well to be very active at the trade deadline if things don't turn around quickly. There are a lot of older assets that can be contributors and actual starters on competitive squads that also still carry some value. Mike Evans has been quite good. I mean, the .52 warp speaks to that. Like, Mike Evans has been good this year and could definitely help some of the competitive teams in a push for a title. George Kittle, he's older. I mean, tight ends do tend to be able to play a little bit longer, but with Sam Laporta on the squad, that makes Kittle potentially expendable at a position that is hard to come by game breakers. Yes, Kittle is inconsistent. Yes, you will get dud weeks, but you will also get week winning weeks. And when it comes to the playoffs, and it's a 1 week, you got to win every week. Having a guy who can put up a big number in the tight end spot is it's valuable. I mean, a lot of the teams are rolling out players that you're just hoping they catch a few balls in that spot. So, yeah, you got Evans, you got Kittle, Tyler Lockett, you've got Ryan Tannehill, assuming he comes back from his ankle injury. You got Aaron Jones, who again he's been injured as well. He's recovering, but like when he is going, he is one of those guys who can give you week-winning performances. Um, all five of those guys are on the older side, and I mean, if a squad is not competing, they could be turned into youth, could be turned into picks, could be just turned into assets that can help contribute more likely next year when you don't really need the contributions this year. So, wouldn't be surprised if FFPrez is kind of at the center of trade deadline um, when the competitors and contenders really go out and start looking for assets to round out their lineups to give them some depth going into the playoffs, to give them that flex spot that can give them week winning performances. Um, yeah, it's been a tough start to the year. It's probably not what was expected. I didn't expect it myself. I'm guessing FFPrez didn't expect it either. But it happens. And there's a lot to like on this squad. I would be shocked if this team isn't competitive in 2024. I'm not saying they're going to be a favorite, but they're going to be a competitive team. They've got a lot of good pieces. That taxi squad, all protected from the poach, um, you can pull them all up. You can pull some of them up. Like between that, between what should be kind of a mid poach pick, some strong assets that can be moved this year. Like there's a lot. This squad, as we see it now, is probably not what we're going to see it even close to at the start of next year. And I mean, even if it is, like even if those older pieces are still on the squad, I would say majority of them aren't at the point where it's a one and done like this year, and then they're going to be absolutely nothing. Like those guys can all be contributors potentially next year as well. There's probably a good chance that most of them are. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this season finishes out. I wouldn't be surprised to see a strong run down the stretch and kind of a lot of potential going into next year being shown with what we see down the stretch. It's tough to start 4-10. It makes it very, very difficult to make the playoffs. It's not 100% out of the question, but I'd say the odds are quite low, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right. Well, that's the end of episode 4 here, and I'll catch you back on episode 5.